Welcome to Xi Jinping briefing. The content of the briefing includes: heart attacks, strokes, dementia, can Biden and Trump beat the odds? Xi Jinping risks setting off another trade war. Taiwan's elections are about more than China. Visiting Maldives president vows greater Belt and Road cooperation with China. Why the Taiwan election matters. Heart attacks, strokes, dementia, can Biden and Trump beat the odds? Economist. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, at 81 and 77 years old respectively, are both outliers in terms of age for political leaders. The average age of heads of government in rich democracies has been falling since 1950, but Biden and Trump are both proposing themselves as candidates for the presidency of the United States despite their advanced ages. The article discusses the potential health risks associated with the job, such as heart attacks and strokes, as well as mental decline. It highlights the importance of genetic factors and a privileged background in determining the health and longevity of political leaders. While some studies suggest that holding political office takes a toll on lifespan, others argue that the status and privilege of the position can be lifespan enhancing. The article also examines the cognitive decline associated with age, particularly in terms of short-term and working memory. However, the author suggests that Biden and Trump may be superagers with superior genetics that allow them to maintain their mental faculties. Xi Jinping risks setting off another trade war. Economist. China's manufacturing sector is experiencing a boom as the government seeks to offset the country's property slump. Sales by China's largest property developers fell by 17% in 2023, prompting officials to turn to manufacturing to boost economic growth. State-owned banks are providing financing to industrial firms, and exporters have been encouraged to expand production. This manufacturing boom could lead to a trade war, as China's rise in production may lead to accusations of dumping and lower-cost goods flooding international markets. Western politicians are becoming more protective of their domestic industries and are more willing to fight on their behalf. Frictions are already emerging, with investigations into Chinese excavators in the UK, anti-subsidy probes into Chinese electric vehicles and biodiesel in the EU, and an anti-dumping investigation into brandy in China. India has also imposed anti-dumping duties on Chinese steel, and Mexico has announced an 80% tariff on some imports of Chinese steel. China's leadership is facing a challenge in managing industrial overcapacity and weak domestic demand while avoiding further alienation of trading partners. Taiwan's elections are about more than China. Economist. Taiwan's presidential election is set to take place on January 11, with the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, and the Chinese nationalist Kuomintang, KMT, battling it out for victory. The election has primarily focused on Taiwan's relationship with mainland China, but voters' biggest priority is economic development. This is particularly true for the younger generation, who are struggling with inflation and expensive housing. The Taiwan People's Party, TPP, which is campaigning on bread and butter issues, is popular among younger Taiwanese. Meanwhile, the KMT's conservative base wants to revive a cross-strait service trade agreement with China to boost Taiwan's economy. Despite the focus on cross-strait relations, Taiwan's future president is unlikely to be determined solely by this issue. Taiwan's voters traditionally divide along identity lines, with those in favor of Taiwanese sovereignty opting for the DPP and those who identify as Chinese preferring the KMT. However, the TPP is drawing support from those who identify as Taiwanese but do not feel obliged to vote for the DPP. Visiting Maldives president vows greater Belt and Road cooperation with China. South China Morning Post. The Maldives has pledged to expand its cooperation with China under the Belt and Road Initiative, according to President Mohamed Muizzu. His comments came during a business forum in southeastern China, where he also stated that the country would explore the bilateral free trade agreement that had been agreed under the previous Indian-friendly presidency. China has long been the largest contributor of tourists to the Maldives, and the country has long been a close ally and developmental partner of the Maldives. However, the Maldives remains dependent on India, which has historically had significant influence in the region. Observers believe that the country's engagement with China will focus on economic issues, including support for the tourism industry and the Belt and Road Initiative. However, they added that India would be closely watching the situation and would be prepared to respond if necessary. Why the Taiwan election matters. BBC. Taiwan's upcoming presidential election will have important implications for the island's relations with both Beijing and Washington. China's increased pressure on Taiwan, including military drills in the Taiwan Strait, has led to a closer relationship between Taiwan and the U.S., with Taiwan securing billions of dollars in new weapons from Washington. If the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, wins a third term, Beijing may escalate military pressure on Taiwan. However, the prospect of a full-blown war is low, given the cost to China's struggling economy. The US has a significant naval presence in the region, and Japan, which hosts the largest concentration of US troops in the region, may become involved. A war in Taiwan would have devastating human and economic consequences, given its role as a critical hub for international trade and its production of semiconductors. Mending ties with China is a priority for Taiwan's next president, but the cost of living and jobs are also major concerns for voters. Can Republicans find consensus on foreign policy? Foreign affairs. The current struggle between nationalism and internationalism within the Republican Party is the most significant moment for Republican foreign policy since 1952, when Dwight Eisenhower defeated his isolationist challengers for the party's presidential nomination. The party's principles of internationalism and support for free trade and immigration have been giving way to a more populist America First approach. The key question is whether the party can blend elements of Reagan-era internationalism and Trump-era America First impulses into a coherent strategy and view of the world. Republican foreign policy is being debated most clearly in Congress. Aid to Ukraine has become a contentious issue, with Republican leaders in the Senate conditioning additional funds on concessions from Democrats on immigration policy and many House Republicans opposing further funding for Ukraine. The clash between these two strands of foreign policy thinking is also playing out in other areas, with Trump proposing tariffs on all countries that export products to the U.S. in a decisive move away from Reagan-era free trade principles. Other Republican presidential hopefuls are following Trump's lead and adopting elements of his America First approach. However, many Republican foreign policy thinkers believe that a blend of the party's current conflicting impulses is necessary and possible. They argue that common ground exists and that rank-and-file Republicans are not as inclined towards neo-isolationism as some of their leaders' public statements suggest. Achieving this synthesis requires consensus on core issues such as China, Taiwan, defense budgets, free trade, immigration, and burden sharing by U.S. allies. Republican leaders must also convince voters that international engagement is not just an altruistic idea but a strategy with tangible benefits. Xi Jinping to go after ants and flies as he intensifies his crackdown on firms. CNN. Chinese President Xi Jinping has announced an intensification of the anti-corruption campaign that he launched when he came to power in 2012. Speaking at a meeting of the Communist Party's Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, Xi stated that the campaign would tackle bribery and corruption within a range of industries including finance, energy and infrastructure. It is thought that Xi is attempting to ensure that his anti-corruption campaign continues to be viewed as a top priority. Since its launch, the campaign has seen the removal of a number of senior officials. Xi, Biden and the $10 trillion cost of war over Taiwan. Japan Times. The cost of a war over Taiwan would be enormous, estimated at around $10 trillion, or 10% of global GDP, according to Bloomberg Economics. The rising economic and military power of China, Taiwan's growing sense of national identity, and the strained relations between Beijing and Washington create conditions for a potential crisis. Although few believe an invasion is imminent, tensions and risks are still present. Investors, military planners, and businesses reliant on Taiwan's semiconductor industry are already taking steps to hedge against the risk of conflict. And that's a wrap for today's news. We covered a wide range of topics, from the health risks of political leaders to trade wars and Taiwan's upcoming election. Starting with the age of political leaders, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are defying the odds by running for presidency at their advanced ages. While there are potential health risks associated with the job, such as heart attacks and strokes, genetic factors and privileged backgrounds can also play a role in determining the health and longevity of political leaders. And who knows, maybe Biden and Trump are super eggers with superior genetics. Speaking of politics, China's manufacturing boom could lead to a trade war as accusations of dumping and lower-cost goods flood international markets. Western politicians are becoming more protective of their domestic industries, and tensions are already emerging with investigations and anti-dumping duties on Chinese products. China's leadership is facing the challenge of managing industrial overcapacity and weak domestic demand while avoiding further alienation of trading partners. Shifting gears to Taiwan's elections, the focus has primarily been on the relationship with mainland China. However, voters' biggest priority is economic development, especially for the younger generation struggling with inflation and expensive housing. The Taiwan People's Party is gaining popularity among younger Taiwanese by focusing on bread and butter issues. Taiwan's future president is unlikely to be determined solely by cross-strait relations, as voters traditionally divide along identity lines. Moving on, the Maldives has pledged to expand its cooperation with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. While China has been a close ally and developmental partner of the Maldives, the country remains dependent on India, which has historically had significant influence in the region. The engagement with China is expected to focus on economic issues, but India will be closely watching the situation and prepared to respond if necessary. Next up, Taiwan's upcoming presidential election will have significant implications for the island's relations with Beijing and Washington. China's increased pressure on Taiwan has led to a closer relationship with the US, with Taiwan securing new weapons. If the ruling party wins again, Beijing may escalate military pressure, but a full-blown war is unlikely due to the cost to China's struggling economy. The US and Japan may become involved, and the economic consequences for Taiwan as a critical hub for international trade would be devastating. Shifting gears to the Republican Party, there is a struggle between nationalism and internationalism within the party's foreign policy. The key question is whether the party can blend elements of Reagan-era internationalism and Trump-era America First impulses into a coherent strategy. Aid to Ukraine has become a contentious issue, and there is a clash between free trade principles and the America First approach. Republican leaders must find common ground and convince voters that international engagement has tangible benefits. Lastly, Chinese President Xi Jinping has announced an intensification of his anti-corruption campaign, targeting bribery and corruption in various industries. This campaign has been a top priority since he came to power in 2012, and it has already seen the removal of several senior officials. Well, that's all for today's news. Remember, these are just brief summaries, so feel free to dive deeper into the articles. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these topics? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.